When notorious liberal student debater Emily Carter stepped onto the stage, she believed her fierce ideology would silence every opposing voice. She had no idea that Barron Trump was about to deliver the most devastating reality check of her life. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The prestigious debate forum had drawn the brightest young minds from universities across America. Throughout the day, passionate discussions had fired up the auditorium, but no one could have predicted what was about to unfold during the open debate session, where any student could take the stage and others could rise to challenge them. The atmosphere was charged with intellectual energy as Emily Carter, known for her aggressive debating style, confidently strode to the podium. Her purple hair matched her fierce demeanor as she adjusted the microphone, a slight smirk playing on her lips. "Fellow students," she began, her voice clear and commanding, "we're here to discuss progress, but there's an elephant in the room we need to address. The controversy over Pope Francis's worsening illness and its chokehold on the Catholic Church's future." The room grew silent. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "Look around," Emily continued, her voice growing bolder. "While we face modern crises, climate change, inequality, and calls for reform, the Vatican is stalled by an 88-year-old pope battling pneumonia and kidney issues. His outdated cardinals, his so-called defenders, his rigid doctrines." Scattered applause erupted, encouraging her to push further. In the third row, a tall, well-dressed young man sat motionless, his expression unreadable. Few recognized him as Barron Trump, who had been quietly observing the debates all day. "This man," Emily's voice dripped with disdain, "this pope, who's been hospitalized since February 14th, 2025, gasping for breath with double pneumonia, somehow still clings to power. He's had his time. It's time to admit that his illness is holding Catholicism back from true progress." The applause grew louder, drowning out the few murmurs of dissent. Emily's eyes blazed with triumph as she prepared to deliver her most controversial point yet, drawing from reports of Francis's critical condition that had shaken the Catholic world. "What we need," Emily declared, her voice rising with conviction, "is a radical shift in papal leadership. Why should a church led by a man too sick to function, relying on oxygen and blood transfusions, have any say in our spiritual future?" The crowd's reaction intensified. Many students were now standing, cheering her on. "This pope, with his frail body and faltering voice," she made air quotes with her fingers, "he's a relic of the past. His reign is crumbling, and it's time we buried it." The applause was thunderous now. Emily was feeding off the energy, growing bolder with each statement. "His values," she scoffed, "endurance, humility, sacrifice, these are just excuses for stagnation. His handlers prop him up on a throne of tradition, and now they lecture us about resilience?" In the third row, Barron Trump remained still, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Around him, students were nodding enthusiastically, some even shouting words of agreement. "I propose," Emily's voice cut through the noise, "that we start a movement to replace this dying pope with someone strong, modern, and capable. Let's face it, he's had his chance. He's fading, and now it's our turn." The professor moderating the debate, Dr. Harrison, stepped forward, his expression concerned. "Does anyone wish to present a counter-argument?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause. Emily crossed her arms, satisfaction evident on her face. The room began to quiet, students looking around, wondering if anyone would dare challenge such a powerful presentation. "Anyone?" Dr. Harrison asked again, already reaching for his papers to move on. That's when a deep, clear voice cut through the silence. "I would." The room fell dead silent. All heads turned toward the source of the voice. Emily's smirk widened as Barron Trump rose from his seat. "Well, well," she drawled into the microphone. "Look who decided to grace us with his opinion. Daddy's boy himself." Scattered laughter rippled through the audience, but Barron's composed demeanor didn't waver as he made his way to the podium. His tall frame and impeccable suit cut a striking figure against the casual atmosphere of the debate hall. Emily stepped aside, making an exaggerated sweeping gesture toward the microphone. Go ahead, Donald's pet, she sneered. Defend your frail pontiff. This should be entertaining. Barron adjusted the microphone, his movements unhurried and deliberate. The audience held its breath, many expecting him to falter under Emily's notorious debate tactics. Instead, he smiled slightly, not a smirk, but a genuine, almost sympathetic expression. Thank you for your passionate presentation, Emily, he began, his voice steady and measured. But passion without wisdom is like a ship without a rudder, powerful but dangerous. Emily's smile flickered for a moment. She hadn't expected this calm, articulate approach. You speak of progress, Barron continued, but true progress isn't built by abandoning a leader because he's ill. It's built by honoring his strength. He paused, letting his words sink in. When you say Pope Francis's pneumonia disqualifies him, do you realize you're dismissing a man who's led 1.2 billion Catholics through decades of change? Emily started to interrupt, but Barron held up a hand, his voice never losing its respectful tone. Please, you had your turn. I listened carefully to every word. The audience stirred. They weren't used to seeing Emily check so gracefully. Now, Barron's voice took on a deeper resonance. Let's talk about what real progress looks like. You mentioned his frailty, his need for oxygen. Did you know that despite his lung infection, diagnosed on February 14th, 2025, at Gemelli Hospital, he's remained alert, working from his hospital bed? Emily rolled her eyes. That's irrelevant. Speaking of relevance, Barron smoothly interjected, let's talk about your claim that his reign is crumbling. His voice took on an edge of steel beneath its polite exterior. The church he's guided provides the very platform you're using to attack him. The schools where we learn, rooted in Catholic legacy, the compassion we debate, inspired by his actions, the freedom to speak, upheld by his endurance. The audience's attention was now fully focused on Barron. Even some of Emily's most vocal supporters were nodding thoughtfully. But he can't lead through this crisis, Emily shot back, her voice rising with frustration. Really? Barron raised an eyebrow. The man who's faced bronchitis, colon surgery in 2021, and a hernia operation in 2023 doesn't understand crisis? He's weathered storms we can't imagine. Emily's face flushed. His illness. His illness. You mean his resilience? Barron's voice carried a quiet intensity. The same resilience that's kept him leading, despite losing part of a lung in his youth? He gestured to the room. Look around you. Everything here, from the values we cherish to the systems we critique, owes something to his perseverance. The crowd murmured, several students exchanging glances. Emily's supporters were growing noticeably quieter. But here's what truly concerns me, Barron continued, his gaze sweeping the room. In the name of progress, you're advocating for the most callous stance imaginable, judging a man by his sickness. Isn't it ironic that while claiming to fight for justice, you're showing no mercy for a pope in pain? Emily's composure was visibly cracking. She hadn't expected this level of articulate opposition. Let me make it even simpler, Barron said, his confidence growing with each word. Let's look at some frail leaders you'd dismiss. Pope John Paul II, sick with Parkinson's, yet he shaped history. Pope Francis, hospitalized with pneumonia in 2025, yet still praying with his staff. My father, 78, still active. Should we discard them because they're not invincible? Oh, how touching, Emily's voice dripped with sarcasm. The privileged heir lectures us about endurance. She turned to the audience with a theatrical gesture. Notice how he mentions popes and elites, the ones who cling to power while the faithful suffer. Several students nodded vigorously. Emily was regaining her confidence. And since you brought up your father, she sneered, let's talk about the values you're so proud of. Values that prop up a failing man, that force outdated faith on us. Interesting, Barron interjected calmly, how you claim to champion compassion while mocking a sick man's struggle. Because his struggle drags us down, Emily shot back, her voice rising. His illness is a burden. And you, she pointed accusingly at Barron, you're just another trust fund baby defending a system that keeps you on top. The crowd was energized again, many students cheering Emily's attack. But Barron's composed smile never wavered. Let's examine that claim, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. You say his illness burdens, yet it's inspired millions to pray, to hope, to serve. My trust fund? I've volunteered at clinics since I was 14. How many hours have you spent with the suffering, Emily? The room fell silent. Emily's triumphant expression flickered. But that's not, she started. Not what you meant, Barron finished. It never is it? When facts don't match your narrative, you switch to personal attacks, a classic tactic of someone losing an argument. Don't you dare! Emily's voice cracked with rage. She stormed toward the podium, purple hair wild, finger jabbing the air. You think you can come here with your suit and your manners and your privilege, lecturing us about values? The room crackled with tension. Some students were standing now, feeding off Emily's anger. You want to talk about suffering? She practically spat the words. Your precious Pope represents everything wrong with this church. The elite, the privileged, hiding behind sickness while the faithful despair. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising to a fever pitch. Look at him standing there like he belongs here, defending a system that keeps us down. You know what? She spun back to Barron, her face contorted with fury. This freak doesn't deserve to be here. The words echoed through the suddenly silent room. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, clearly alarmed, but Barron raised a hand. It's okay, Professor, he said quietly, his composure unshaken. Then turning to Emily with an almost sympathetic smile. You know what's interesting, Emily? When facts fail, you resort to shouting. When logic fails, you turn to insults. When reason fails, he paused, letting the moment hang. You show everyone exactly who you really are. Emily's face flushed deep red. I'm showing everyone the truth about people like you. No, Barron's voice was firm but gentle. You're showing everyone what happens when scorn masquerades as progress. You claim to fight weakness while weakening. You preach care while showing none. You demand respect while disrespecting a man's sacrifice. The audience was completely still now, hanging on every word. But let me tell you what I see here, Barron continued, his voice carrying a quiet strength that commanded attention. I see someone so consumed by ideology that she's forgotten a basic truth. Every leader carries scars from their journey. Emily tried to interrupt, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. You're twisting I'm quoting you directly, Barron replied smoothly. You called him a relic. You mocked his pain. You ridiculed his service. And why? Because he doesn't fit your vision. That's not progressive. That's cruelty. He turned to address the entire room. You all just witnessed something remarkable. You saw someone claim to champion care while attacking a sick man's worth. Someone demanding change while rejecting fortitude. Someone preaching mercy while showing absolute intolerance for struggle. Emily's face had lost all color now. Her supporters were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But here's the most ironic part, Barron continued, his voice taking on a tone of genuine concern. While you stand here demanding we replace him, you're benefiting from his legacy, the very faith you critique, sustained by him, the hope you feel, inspired by him, the debate you're in, made possible by him. He paused, letting his words sink in. The silence in the room was deafening. So tell me, Emily, Barron's voice was almost gentle now. In your vision of progress, is there room for a leader who fights through illness? Or is mercy only acceptable when it's easy? Emily opened her mouth to respond, but for the first time since the debate began, no words came out. But here's what I find most interesting, Barron said, his voice carrying both authority and compassion. While you claim to fight for the future, you're repeating the oldest mistake in history, believing that worth only belongs to the strong. Emily's fierce demeanor was cracking. Her hands gripped the podium, knuckles white. You see, Barron continued, true progress isn't about discarding the weak. It's about learning from them. Every leader thinks they're unbreakable, and every leader eventually realizes how much they owe to grit. The room was completely still. Students who had been cheering Emily's attacks now sat in thoughtful silence. That relic you mock. His voice grew softer, yet somehow more powerful. He was once vigorous too. He led, he served, he endured. But he learned something valuable along the way. That lasting faith comes from persisting, not quitting. Emily's shoulders slumped slightly. The fire in her eyes was flickering out, replaced by something else, the first glimmer of understanding. "So here's my suggestion," Barron said, his voice gentle but firm. "Instead of trying to replace a man in pain, why don't we try supporting him? You might be surprised by how much he understands about struggle. After all, he's lived it more than we have." With quiet dignity, he stepped back from the podium and returned to his seat, leaving Emily standing alone with the weight of his words. After Barron's powerful conclusion, Emily quietly returned to her seat. The debates continued, though the energy in the room had noticeably shifted. Students who spoke after seemed more measured, more thoughtful in their approaches. Nearly an hour later, as Dr. Harrison was about to close the session, Emily's hand rose tentatively into the air. "Yes, Miss Carter?" the professor asked warily, clearly concerned about reopening the earlier conflict. May I speak one more time?" Her voice was barely audible, nothing like her earlier confident tone. Several students exchanged worried glances. Dr. Harrison hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Briefly, please." Emily walked to the podium, her steps uncertain. Gone was the fierce debater who had commanded the stage earlier. This was someone different, someone who had been profoundly shaken. "I need to say something," she began, her voice trembling. "Earlier today, I stood here full of arrogance, attacking a man's illness and disrespecting the faith he upholds for millions. I was wrong." She took a shaky breath. "I never imagined that Barron Trump would be the one to show me what true strength looks like, that someone I was ready to dismiss would teach me about real compassion and endurance. I'm sorry. To everyone I offended, to Pope Francis, battling pneumonia as we speak, I was blind, and today my eyes were opened." Without waiting for a response, she quickly left the podium and slipped out of the auditorium. Later that evening, as students were filing out of the building, Emily spotted Barron gathering his things. Her heart pounding, she approached him hesitantly, expecting to be met with the same disdain she had shown him earlier. "Barron," her voice was small, uncertain. Could I talk to you for a moment?" He turned, and to her surprise, his face held no trace of anger or resentment. Instead, he smiled warmly. "Of course. I just wanted to say," she struggled to find the right words, "I'm so sorry for everything I said, for how I acted." "You know what's interesting about being our age?" Barron replied thoughtfully. "We're bold enough to judge, but young enough to miss the deeper truths. It's normal to get swept up in ideals and passionate causes. That's exactly why a leader's struggle is so valuable." "He's been where we are." Emily stared at him, taken aback by his compassion. "How are you so wise about all this?" "I've had good teachers," he smiled. "People who taught me that true leadership isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance. Pope Francis has faced these same doubts, felt these same certainties, and learned these same lessons. Like his fight with pneumonia today. We don't have to agree with him, but we do need to respect his journey." Overwhelmed by his kindness, Emily suddenly stepped forward and hugged him. For a moment, Barron seemed surprised, but then returned the embrace with gentle understanding. As they parted, both knew that this wasn't just about winning or losing a debate. It was about something far more important. The moment when wisdom overcame scorn and empathy conquered division. The story of Emily Carter and Barron Trump's debate over Pope Francis's illness reveals profound lessons about compassion, resilience, and the value of diverse perspectives. Emily's initial scorn for the Pope's frailty reflects a common modern tendency to dismiss those who appear weak. Yet Barron's defense underscores that true strength lies not in perfection, but in perseverance through adversity. This teaches us to look beyond surface limitations and honor the contributions of those who endure. Like Pope Francis, who despite pneumonia in 2025, continues leading with grace. The narrative also highlights the danger of ideological arrogance. Emily's certainty blinds her until humility opens her eyes, reminding us to approach disagreements with openness rather than judgment. In life, we can apply this by listening to those we disagree with, recognizing their experiences as bridges to understanding, not barriers. Finally, the story champions empathy over exclusion. Barron's kindness transforms Emily, showing that compassion can heal division. We can live this by supporting the struggling, be it a sick friend or a weary stranger, valuing their journeys as vital to our shared human story. These lessons foster a deeper, more connected existence. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more inspiring tales that celebrate the values that shape our faith. Thanks for watching. God bless you, and God bless the journey of resilience.